right. Hey, welcome back, everyone. We're going to continue in just a few moments, and what we're going to do, Dave is going to come and give the message, but before we do that, we kind of have a little tradition here where we read the scriptures together. I'm going to invite Kevin Hanna up to the stage. Everybody welcome Kevin as we read the scripture together.
All right, here we go. This is out of Matthew. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. This is the word of the Lord.
Thank you, Kev. All right. Well, we're in a new sermon series for the next 2 weeks called The Great Giveaway. And this is a sermon series about what it means to be generous. So today I get to talk about money. Woo! Because, you know, what's ever gone wrong historically when religion and money get mixed up together? Anyway. But the reality is, look, I know that probably some of you have seen religion be used to wrap guilt or shame or weird manipulation, and so we need to talk a little bit about that because generosity actually is something that's critically important. Jesus actually said something that I don't know if we believe. In Acts 20, Jesus is quoted. It says this, "In everything I did, I showed you that by this kind of hard work we must help the weak, remembering the words of the Lord Jesus himself said, 'It is more blessed to give than to receive.'" I don't know. It seems to me it's more blessed to receive. I like getting stuff. Giving stuff seems sometimes to hurt. I don't know. But then I start thinking about it, and actually, generosity actually does unlock something in humans. If you think about the times when you've been around, when you've seen generosity. I remember growing up kind of at the end of the mid-'90s and the late 90s, there was a show that was wildly popular. Oprah, the Oprah show, you know, Oprah Winfrey. And so Oprah, and she had these episodes where she would just give away, to the entire studio audience, all sorts of stuff. They'd be like, you know, there's a new car, and if you look underneath your seat, everybody gets a new car. And everyone was like, what? And they look under their chairs, and everyone got a new car, and everyone's going crazy, and they're dancing, and they're singing, and it was unbelievable, right? And then it would get more and more crazy. Oprah would get more and more generous. She'd be like, everybody gets a school. Everybody gets a school with faculty. You get a school district. And it's just like, what am I going to do with the school district, Oprah? I don't know, but then they get more and more outlandish. It's like, everybody gets a humpback whale, you get a humpback whale, and you get a humpback whale. Everybody gets a humpback whale. And it's like, oh. And it's incredible, this generosity. And it actually does unlock something in us as we see generosity. It does form us. I did some deep dive into some secular research that looked at generosity and its impact on humans. The idea is that modern scholarship and modern studies actually show that what Jesus said, that it's better to give than to receive, is actually true. Here are 5 studies that I found, and I found lots. I only had time for 5. So here's 5 interesting ones that I found. These are actual studies with some links. Study number 1, being kind to literally anyone boosts your happiness. It could be your mom, it could be a family member, it could be a complete stranger. It doesn't matter if you're nice to somebody and kind and generous to somebody, it boosts your happiness levels. Study number 2, kindness, being generous, actually releases oxytocin. I almost said Oxycontin, that's a very different drug. Oxytocin is a natural neurochemical. It's a powerful bonding agent. And when we are generous and we see generosity, it actually unleashes that. We are literally bound biochemically to one another when we are generous with one another. Study number 3, kindness, generosity makes a way bigger impact on both parties than you'd ever think. In fact, the researchers, it was really fascinating. There were people in this research who said, what I did, I don't know if it made that big of an impact, but I know that it changed me. And people remember those moments. But what they found is when they actually talked to the people who received it, they say, oh, no. It made a giant impact. People could remember acts of generosity done on their behalf for years and years, sometimes decades. Anybody here know what that's like? Somebody did something kind or generous for you, and you still think about it even now. You're like, man, that person, they really changed something. They really helped me. It makes a tremendous impact. Study number 4, kindness, generosity forges social connections which really help with depression. This is a study out of Ohio State. Go Ohio, I'm from Ohio. Yes. Well, what? No. Here's a quote I love from the study. This is what the actual study said. I love this quote. It said, in fact, acts of kindness and generosity may more effectively improve social connection and related dimensions of well-being than prevailing CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, techniques. Therefore, people suffering from symptoms of depression or anxiety may help heal themselves by doing good deeds for others. That this is as effective, if not more, than therapy. The author of the study, David Craig, he had this quote, and I just thought it was so profound. He said, something as simple as helping other people can go above and beyond other treatments in helping heal people with depression and anxiety. And I have an incredible photo here of an Ohio State person helping somebody. There it is, just helping a Michigan Wolverine. You can see he's like looking deep in his eyes as if to say, I see you. And that's just incredible. It's just incredible. It's just amazing. It happens to be a Wolverine. There it is. And what's this? Oh, what's that? Ohio State. Oh, they're 3rd in the AP poll, and Michigan's 12th. Weird, huh? Anyway, how'd that slide get in there? Anyway. Study number 5. There's a guy named Hans Selye. He's the founder of stress theory. He was the first scientist to identify the link between stress, biological stress, and disease, that stress actually causes disease. And so he was the first person in the 30s to discover this, but he also discovered the cure. He said, the cure is to be, this is a quote from Hans, to be happy and healthy, one must help others. And this is in the 30s. This idea of generosity is being meted out across the literature, the scientific literature, that somehow we become more human, more healthy, and more happy when we give. That Jesus' words, it's better to give than to receive, though counterintuitive, actually seem to be true. But it's not just research that shows this. And I don't know what your experiences were, but when I came and became a follower of Jesus at the end of my college experience, my senior year in college, I saw the generosity of God at work quickly and amazingly. God's people have always been models for generosity in my experience. I have seen it. When I graduated, I knew I had to take like a gap year. I was like, I got to figure out the Jesus thing, and I got to figure this out. So I gave a year, and I said, I'm going to take a year. I'm going to serve at a Christian nonprofit. And so they said, yeah, we'll absolutely take you for a year, and we'll teach you everything we know, and we'll care for you. I said, that sounds great. And I said, how does it work? And they go, well, we don't pay you. You have to raise something called support. And I was like, wait, I have to raise my own money? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, how much? And they're like, well, all of it. And I'm like, I have to raise all my money for how long? They go, for as long as you're here, for like a year. So I was like, are you kidding me? I have to raise my own money? I go, how's that going to work? And they're like, oh, it'll work. We've seen this again and again and again. You just put it out to the people in your church community, your faith community. You explain what you're trying to do, and God's people will return with generosity. And I'm like, there's no way. So I sent out all the letters, and I talked to as many people as I could, and I talked to my church, and in 8 days, I had raised the entire year that I needed. 8 days. This is incredible. God's people have always been generous. To me, to my family, it's actually overwhelmingly, I don't understand it. But there's a tension. And I want to talk about this tension. Yes, it's true. The conversation about generosity and money is based on our best understanding of the biblical theological vision of the good life and the way of Jesus. In fact, roughly 15% of Jesus' teachings are about money or resources. That's a large percentage, and we must pay attention to them. Jesus has things to say. Because you and I both know that money is a particular and peculiar idol that does reach into our heart and say, trust me, trust me, trust me. And God is saying, no, don't trust in money, trust in me. Money also has a way of controlling people, and God's like, I don't want you to be controlled by anything. And our church's worship giving fund does do a lot of good work in our city and in our world. More than $2.5 million was given outside of our walls, or we plan to give more than $2.5 million in this coming fiscal year, and we will do that. But there's a tension, and the tension is because you have seen religion misuse teaching on money. They've used guilt and shame and manipulation. And there's another side of this too, which is that when I talk about giving and money, it's of personal benefit to me. It's my salary, it's my buddy's salary, it's the lights, it's this place. And so there is a tendency, therefore, for pastors and leaders and church leaders that leaves them vulnerable to the temptation to co-opt or abuse the biblical theological vision of the good life and what it means to be generous for personal gain. And you've seen this. This is super gross. This is when people use the Bible or theology or religion just to make themselves rich, and they use and abuse and manipulate and use shame and guilt tactics. This is really gross. I remember in the 80s, there was a televangelist named Jimmy Swaggart. Do you guys remember? There's a whole host of them. And they would say things like, give money to me, and whatever money you give, God will return it 100-fold. These weird promises. And it got really gross. It was very clear that these people were using God's name and the theological vision that Jesus had for the good life. They were using it just to make themselves wealthy. And it was great. One guy even said, if I don't raise $1 million, God's going to kill me. And I'm like, well, let's see how close we can get to that. Like, why don't we raise just like $999,990 and just wait and see what God does? I think that'd be an interesting observation to do. But the goal here is, and I remember this one time I heard a televangelist say something like, to this older woman, don't pay for your chemo. Take the woman you pay for your chemo treatment, send it to me, because the kingdom will flow through me, and God's blessing will flow through you more than if you took the chemo, and it'll do more to heal you. I mean, just really gross manipulation, really gross stuff. So that's real. So there's a number of ways that we try as a church to be as forthright as we can. We know that the giving and generosity can only happen in an arena of trust. So a couple of things that you may or may not know. First of all, our budget as a church is public information. And our budget actually has to be approved by our members. There's 1,505 members of our church. And this past week, they got an email saying, here's the budget. And they had a whole week to review it and to ask questions of our executive pastor and to see if there's any questions that they might have. In addition, our church tries really hard to be as generous as we can. This year, our elders and our leadership are committed to giving away as much as we can. This year, we're trying to give away 28%. That's on our budget. We're going to try to give away 28% in this fiscal year. Those things are important. See, and I say this because, the national average for churches, how much churches give away is 2.7%. So this is substantially more. The reason I say that is because God, I think, has blessed this area with incredible resources, so we should be more generous, right? That just makes sense. But I also want to say this because we try to be as transparent as possible, because this issue of money and trust is really important to us. And so that's one of the things that we talk about. We try to build trust. And so if you have questions or ever have questions about our money or our budget, we try to be as transparent as possible. Please come and ask them. But again, this teaching is not about giving what is ours to God or His church. Because I don't actually think, as I read the scriptures, I don't think anything is ours. I think all of life, everything that we have, is actually God's. He gives it to us. He is the source, from our very breath to every bit of resources we have. I think about the psalmist who proclaims in Psalm 24, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. What's God's? Everything. Everything is God's. In 1 Chronicles The author writes, yours, Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the majesty and the splendor, for everything in heaven and earth is yours. And in the New Testament, the author James puts this. He says, every good, every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. The idea that James says is that everything that we have is actually a good gift given by a good God. Or put in modern vernacular, in his fantastic book, Generous Justice, author and pastor Tim Keller put it this way. He said, if you have money or power or status today, it is due to the century and place in which you were born, to your talents and capacities and health, none of which you earned. In short, all your resources are, in the end, the gift of God. This is just true. In the words of the famous Yankees catcher Yogi Berra, there are some people who go through life having been born on third base thinking they've hit a triple. And we are people, most of us in this room, who were born on third base because of the time and location of our birth, the circumstance. And so the reality is none of this is ours. None of this. None of our lives. None of it. And so if none of it's ours, and God gives us to it, gives all that to us, we have a responsibility to steward it. I want to turn our attention back to that teaching that Kevin read in Matthew, in the Sermon on the Mount. This is from the Sermon on the Mount, which we went through a number of years ago. We're going to go through it again, right here. In Matthew 6:19, I'm going to read this passage because Jesus has so much to say in this passage that I think is helpful. He says, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But steal up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moth and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Jesus is just so wise here. He's saying, if you and I take a lot of time and use our energies in life to accumulate a lot of stuff, we are going to just de facto have our hearts drawn to that stuff. We're going to be worried about that stuff because our time and energy has been spent accumulating it. And in the ancient world, this was an uncertain proposition. Bad things happened in the ancient world. There was droughts and famines, foreign conquerors, and raiding parties. It's not like here today in the stock market, where if you put your money in the stock market, nothing ever bad will ever happen. Heaven, Jesus says, that's what the heaven treasure or sky treasure, or treasures from heaven. This is what Jesus is saying is, look, there's another type of treasure that actually is about relationships. It's about being right with God, right with others, becoming like God himself. And that stuff is really not stuff at all. In fact, it's non-stuff. But because it's non-stuff and because it's from God, it actually can never be threatened. Ironically, the things that make us the most happy, the real treasure in this world, isn't stuff at all. It flows from God and our relationship with him. This peace with God, peace with others, peace with self. Shalom, peace. And Jesus is trying to get us to see that's the real treasure. That's the true treasure. And that treasure can actually never be taken away. And then Jesus continues on, and I wasn't actually going to even talk on this. There's this next part that Jesus talks. It basically tells a riddle. And I read it, and I was like, I don't understand what Jesus is talking about, so I'm just going to keep reading. You ever do that in the Bible? You're like, I have no idea what that means. I'm going to keep reading. And that's a great technique. But sometimes you should I was like, maybe I should understand this. So it took a little while, and I listened to some stuff and read some stuff. And it was really interesting. I was like, I don't understand this. So here it is. Jesus tells this riddle. And the reason I don't get it is because it's, well, we'll get to that. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. Then the light within you is darkness. How great is that darkness? What? So, okay, let's get into this. I'm going to turn English teacher. Here we go. Okay, first of all, Jesus uses a couple of metaphors. You know what these are. First, he talks about light and dark. Okay, so first we know this. Light in the Bible is always a metaphor for divine presence, for God himself. When God's around, light is there. In the beginning, Genesis, right? What does God do? He creates light, right? And the light drives away the darkness. This is who God is. And darkness is the opposite of that. It's the absence of God. It can also be evil, or sometimes not just evil, sometimes being lost. Being lost in the darkness, people who are lost. And then lamp or lampstand, this is an interesting metaphor. There's always a lamp, and the lamps always hold up the light. In the temple, there was lampstands that held up God's light, and they were never supposed to be extinguished as a metaphor for God's presence in the temple. But then, in the New Testament, the lampstands are not in the temple. The lampstands are actually people who are followers of God are called lampstands. Like, we have a light, and we share it. And then Jesus even says, let your light shine. Put it up. Let it shine. Hide it under a bushel? No. Put it up on a lamp. Thank you for that. I appreciate everyone here. You guys got it. That was right there. Bam. We didn't even rehearse that. And so the idea is Jesus is like, hey, put your light up like you're a lampstand. In Revelation, the churches are called lampstands. Now, here's the thing about a lampstand. Does the lamp create the light? No. Is the lamp the light? No. It just holds up the light. Who's the light? Jesus. The correct answer is always Jesus in church. Anyway, we are not, the lampstand just holds the light. We're not the light, but we hold it. And so that's important. But then Jesus uses this weird imagery. He says this, the eye of the lamp is the body. So then if your eye is clear, that's the NASB, healthy is the word in NIV, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. So if that light is in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? This word for clear or healthy is the word haplos. It's a Greek word. It's only used like a couple of times in the New Testament, right here. And it has two meanings, both of which are intended by Jesus. It's wordplay. The Greek word for haplos is whole or complete or sincere, but it also means generous. And both are meant here. And the idea of having a good eye or a bad eye was an idiom in the ancient world. An idiom is a figure of speech that's hard to translate, but it would have made sense to the people back then. For example, an English idiom that we use sometimes is, you are the apple of my eye. That makes no sense. I don't have an apple in my eye. An apple, what does that even mean? That doesn't make any sense. It's a weird idiom. Basically, it means you're beloved to me and I treasure you. But instead of saying that, we are the apple of the eye. In Hebrew, the way the Jews say that phrase is, you are the little person in my eye. Now, that makes even less sense, but here's what they mean. Sometimes you get so close to a person, you can actually see your reflection in their eye. Or you can see your reflection in their eye. Like when a mother holds a baby. This is what the image is. You are the little person in my eye. I adore you. That's what that comes from. But that's weird to translate. So here's what bad eye and good eye mean. And let me show you. In Hebrew and in Greek thought, if you have a good eye, that meant you were generous. If you have a bad eye, that means you were the opposite of generous. And this idiom is used throughout the Old Testament. Let me show you some examples, and new. In Proverbs 22:9, it says, and you'll see here, whoever has a good eye will be blessed, for he shares his bread with the poor. So if you have a good eye, what do? You share. So that's good. But let me show you the evil eye thing. Proverbs 23:6, do not eat the bread of a man whose eye is evil. Do not desire his delicacies, for he is likely one who is inwardly calculating. Eat and drink, he says to you, but his heart is not with you. So he's pretending to be one way, but he's actually not that way. He's evil. He's trying to calculate and take. In Proverbs 28:22, a man whose eye is evil hastens after wealth. He does not know that poverty will come upon him. The idea of here is that somebody who's evil is the opposite of generous. They're going after their own stuff. And then Jesus uses this term one more time in a very interesting parable, one of the most confusing and interesting in the entire Bible in terms of Jesus' teachings about money. It's a very weird parable told in Matthew 20 where Jesus tells the story of this guy who owns a vineyard and he has a harvest and he has to hire workers. And he hires some in the morning, some at noon, and some right before the end of the day. And then when it comes time to settle wages, he pays them all the same amount. And the people react because that's not fair. And Jesus is telling this is how God is. This is in Matthew 20. And on receiving it, they grumbled at the master of the house, saying, "These last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat." But the master of the house replied to them, "Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius?" That's a day's wage. "Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to these last worker as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or do you begrudge my generosity?" This is how it's translated. But the actual Greek, Jesus is doing a word play. He says, or he basically says, or do you have a bad eye because I have a good eye? This is what Jesus is saying. Hapless. Do you have a bad eye because I happen to have a good eye? This is what's going on here. Regardless, Jesus is trying to get a point across to us in this, that the eye is somehow a window into what's inside of us. Now, there's a lot of theological debate, and I don't know what the answer is. Some theologians say it's a window, which means the world, the bad stuff can get into us, or God can get into us. Other theologians say, no. It actually is a window outward, so whatever in us is shown to other people. I think that's kind of an exercise in distraction. I think what Jesus is trying to say is what's on the inside and what we show has to be the same. He's after integration. So I made a translation for myself. This is the David Tieche translation. Dangerous to do. I did it for myself. Can I share it with you? If it helps you, great. If it doesn't help you, please don't tell Jay. This is how I've internalized this quixotic parable of Jesus. Matthew 6. People are like lampstands who were made to hold up the generous Genesis light of God. And our eyes are like a window. It lets whatever light is in us. So when we look out onto the world with God's light of generosity, thinking about how we can give our things and our life away, our whole body will be full of God's light. But if your eyes look out and you only see what you can grab, get, and hoard, that's a misspelling of hoard. It's the wrong word, hoard. That's bothering. I put that in there so you'd see. Even the wise make errors. But if you only look and see what you can grab, get, and hoard, then it's like a lampstand that's projecting darkness. An oxymoron. How can it be? How terrible. How can a lampstand project darkness? And this is what Jesus is saying. We have that option. The point he's trying to make, I think, is that generosity is the God life. I even love our series branding that Jesse, our graphic designer, made. Look, do you see? It's a lampstand generating out. There's some deeply biblical things going on even in our graphic design department. But I want to be clear about this. Why are Christians generous? Jesus is trying to get us to see that generosity, looking out onto the world in the way that God does, is so important not because of psychological studies or because it will make us happy or lead to a life hack in which we will get more joy and oxytocin released in our brain. The reason Christians are generous is because we are made in the image of a God who is incredibly generous. Think about how much God has done for us, how much He has given. Think about how much God has done for you, how much you have been given. Think about the extent of God's generosity, His sustaining life. Think about how much God gave sacrificially for you and for me. Even at communion, we rehearse this, don't we? Part of communion is remembering the great sacred sacrificial act of Jesus giving His very body and blood while we were yet sinners. Undeserved. Generosity that makes no sense. That is beyond the imagination. And God keeps giving and giving and giving. This is why Christians give. Not to earn or because of guilt or shame or manipulation, but because of response to God who has already given. Everything's his. He gives and we respond. So a couple of thoughts to get practical, and maybe this will be helpful. I hope it is. First off, we have a financial wisdom lecture. I know the topic of money can be difficult, and so we want to have some folks who are really wise around money, and God has put some people in our church who are very wise about money. They're just good with money, but even more than that, they have seen how it's mal-shaped and malformed people and how to have a proper relationship with it. So Scott Paring, one of our elders, is a financial planner. He's seen this in spades. There's a lot of money in the Bay Area. He knows how money can warp and twist, how it can turn into a weird idol, and how to get free from it. So he's got a financial wisdom lecture that he's going to be giving. And if that would be helpful to you, to have the beginnings of this, if this is a topic you've even avoided because you don't even know what it might mean to look like to have a healthy relationship with money, this is perhaps a resource for you. I hope it would be helpful. And secondly, of course, in the idea of generosity, if you think about it, Beautiful Day is a great opportunity for us to practice generosity together as a community, to serve. We encourage you to sign up. But that's a little bit more about our time. The finances thing is a little bit trickier in terms of what does it mean for us to be generous with our money. It would be weird and bad and I think wrong for me to give pastoral advice in this room for what you should do because one size does not fit all. But I want to talk about a couple of different buckets or situations that you might find yourself in. 3 specific buckets, and each one has a unique thing that's going on. So I want to talk about those real quick and then we will close. And we've talked about this before. First of all, for those who are facing financial hardship, there are folks in our community, especially in the Bay Area, it is a difficult season. Sometimes a job loss or health issues or bills from medical bills or just a fear that maybe there's not going to be enough tomorrow. If you're in the middle of financial hardship, if I ask you to give and you're like, I don't have anything to give, not only is every dollar accounted for, I'm in negative dollars accounted for. I think what happens is there can be an enslaving lie. Money will whisper this thing, I can save you. If you just had money, then you'd be okay. And that's a lie. And the truth I think that God wants to whisper is no. Only God can save. Your circumstances are difficult, but God can save. And your practice is to share and to give what you have, which is the gift of your story. This takes tremendous courage and bravery. But would you please be a person who shares with us your need? How can we meet your need if we don't know it? And again, if we say we're a family and you have a need, then we have an obligation. It matters. So if you have a need, please come and share that with us that we might meet it. It would be our joy to do so. It would be our joy to do so. There's another bucket of people, financial uncertainty. This is where it's like, well, I'm nervous about the future. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if there's enough. Maybe it's living paycheck to paycheck or week to week or month to month. And the enslaving lie is if I just had more money, then things would be calm. Money offers certainty. If I had more money, then things could be smooth sailing. And the honesty is that money cannot offer certainty. Only God can. Money comes and goes. God is certain. And so the intentional practice is to give and live thoughtfully and consistently and selflessly. Do some work with God and say, what might it look like for me to give thoughtfully and consistently and selflessly? Here's why this is so important. Here's what it doesn't mean. Every time I do this and every time I give, I'm like, oh man, I'm going to miss that money. But it is a chance for me to say out loud to God and to money, money doesn't take care of me, God does. I trust in God's provision. I do. And so it's a reminder that my certainty and my provision and my care is in the hands of God. I do not trust money for that. I trust God. And money can be a weird idol that gets inside me. There's a third bucket. Those who are financially stable or pretty comfortable. These are folks who are not worried about next week or next year. They're fine. And the enslaving lie is this is all mine. And the liberating truth is what we just talked about. No, actually everything is God's. And so the intentional practice is to live and give selflessly and sacrificially and perhaps even radically. To enter into that conversation about what that might look like. Again, this is between you and God. Ask the Holy Spirit to guide you. But those are 3 buckets, and maybe you find yourself identifying in one of them. And maybe those action steps might help. I want to close with this. You know, it's interesting. In the Greco-Roman world, pleasure was considered the greatest, most desirable good. And generosity was considered foolish, the opposite of virtue. Why would you waste your money on this? But these first Christians, they took seriously the teachings of Jesus. They denied themselves, they took up their cross, and they shared their resources, even at great cost, with one another and with those in need. And they did this because they believed that none of it was theirs to begin with. They studied the words of Jesus, who concluded that parable about the light and the lamp, saying this: no one can serve 2 masters. You're going to hate the one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You can't serve both God and mammon. And these early Christians said, then we will serve God. We will let God control us, not money. We will use money as an instrument. Tim Keller, again, I'm going to close with this. This is what he said. He said, the early church was strikingly different from the culture around it in this way. The pagan society was stingy with its money and promiscuous with its body. A pagan gave nobody their money and practically gave everybody their body. And the Christians came along and they gave practically nobody their body and they gave practically everybody their money. We're going to close with a liturgy that we say together as a church almost every week. And this liturgy is a way for us to practice and rehearse and remind ourselves of these deep truths. So as we close, I want us to just read and think and ponder these words. And may Jesus' invitation for us to be generous, to walk in the ways of the God who made us, who is a generous God, may that permeate all aspects of our lives. Let's read this together. Will you read it with me? Holy Father, there is nothing we have that you have not given us. All we have belongs to you. To spend all on ourselves, to give without cost, is the way of the world. But sacrifice is the way of Christ. Help us to steward our resources in such a way that you might entrust us with true riches. Help us withstand the delusion of riches and grow in gratitude and generosity for your glory and for the good of the world. Amen. God, as we enter into this time, I pray that your Spirit would move and help us see just how generous you've been to us. And may all that we do be a response to your staggering, earth-shattering, life-changing generosity on our behalf. Amen and amen.